I'm speaking with Yasser Munif. He's a professor of sociology at Emerson College in Boston and active with the global campaign of solidarity with the Syrian Revolution. He'll be speaking in Old Lyme, Connecticut on Saturday, January 7th in a program called Syria, We Want Action. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Let me start with a terrible question. Is it over in terms of the liberated areas of Syria? Is Assad just going to take everything back?
I don't think so. I think that it's an extremely challenging period. I think this is possibly the most difficult moment for the Syrian revolt. And I think it's a moment for reflection and thinking for what kind of strategies need to be adopted, what kind of alliances need to be forged, and the long-term kind of thinking that the revolutionaries need to embrace. What's clear is that when the Syrian regime was attacking Aleppo and with massive violence and trying to uproot the resistance inside Aleppo, it wasn't able to defend Palmyra, and it lost Palmyra very quickly when ISIS attacked the city and took it over in 3 or 4 days. So it's clear that the Syrian regime cannot really deploy much troops in different battles and defend the territories that it had conquered earlier. According to certain estimates, the Syrian regime has around 20 to 25,000 loyal fighters, and all the rest is composed of different militias that are more pro-Iran, and then the Russian aerial force. So I think it's a long fight and war. I don't think it's over, but I think it's a turning point for the opposition.
Now, what areas are still considered liberated areas? I mean, Idlib and Ghouta. What places?
Yeah, depending on how you want to look at it. So, for example, there is the south, which is mostly composed of Free Syrian Army, and the Islamist militias or forces are really marginal or in the fringe. But that front has been completely freezed because of Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the U.S., who think that it's not a priority to really launch an attack or open a front against the Syrian regime, but instead fight the pockets of ISIS territories that are present on those in those areas. So this is one of the areas that is liberated, but is under considerable pressure and doesn't have the resources to open a new front or to really function properly. And then there is Idlib, which is mostly controlled by more Islamist groups. One of the strategies that the Syrian regime adopted in the past 2 years has been to siege certain areas and starve the population, and then make some kind of negotiation with the opposition and the different groups controlling those territories, and then uproot them and displace the population and the fighters, and mostly the most radical fighters to the Idlib area. And so that's why there is a high rate of Islamists and jihadists in Idlib. It's been basically the destination for many of the radical and the Islamists. And Jabhat Fath al-Sham, which is the new name for Jabhat al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda offshore. So, and then the second major force is the Ahrar al-Sham, which is the largest military group in Syria with around 15 to 20,000 fighters. And that's an Islamist jihadist groups. And right now there are major infighting within the group because some leaders want to build an alliance with Jabhat Fath al-Sham, the Al-Qaeda group, and others who want to split from that and join the more moderate FSA fighters. So Idlib is not necessarily the best region, and the opposition or the revolutionaries are facing a lot of pressure to operate, and they're under constant surveillance and attacks, and Jabhat Fatah al-Sham oftentimes attack the FSA groups and try to marginalize them and take their weapons and so on. And then there is the third territory is in northern Syria, but those military groups are completely controlled and dependent on Turkish willingness to give them resources and weapons, and so they can't really have a say or an independent decision making in those areas.
And what about the Kurdish Syrians? Is that yet another area?
And then the Kurdish Syrian are obviously controlling most of northern Syria, but they have a really ambiguous relationship with the opposition or with the revolutionaries. Oftentimes they are willing to make deals with the Syrian regime or with the Russian or with the US, depending on who is the better ally, and betray the revolution. And I'm talking here about the PYD, not obviously the population or the various other groups who are more closer to the Syrian Revolution. So it's not clear how that region is going to evolve in the coming future, and whether they are going to have a more healthy relationship with the opposition or the revolutionaries. But right now, the relationship is very ambiguous.
Now, the Putin government claims there's going to be a ceasefire. What do you hear about that? Do you believe it? And so on.
So it's not clear exactly what that ceasefire is going to look like. But what is disturbing is that they have been speaking mostly with Islamist groups. The FSA groups have been marginalized. They haven't been invited to the different meetings that took place in Ankara, and that's a question mark. It seems that they are not included in the deal. So the opposition wants to have an agreement that covers the entire Syrian territory and includes all the factions. And the Syrian regime is opposed to that. They want to include only the more Islamist groups, and mostly the groups that are present in Idlib and in the countryside of Aleppo, because they have plans for Al-Ghouta and the suburbs of Damascus, and also Daraa in the south, and they want those fronts to be outside any kind of deal because they want to take them over, and they seem to aspire for the removal of the opposition groups or the military groups in Al-Ghouta and in western Damascus before Trump takes over. So completely changing the nature of the battle in the Damascus area, to make sure that Damascus is not under any threat in the near future.
Well, my last question for today is about Turkey. I mean, there's been claims that once Turkey just allowed Islamists freely to flow into Syria, now they seem to be doing something else, perhaps because of the Kurds. How would you evaluate what they've been doing with regard to Syria?
So the main priority for Ankara, for Turkey in the past, was to push for Muslim Brotherhood takeover of power in Syria. That was in the beginning. And then very quickly it became unrealistic. And more recently, their main goal in Syria is obviously to contain the Kurdish influence and prevent the Kurds from declaring some kind of autonomy or independence in the Kurdish areas. So that's their priority, and they're doing that in a number of ways. Militarily on the ground, they are backing the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, and some Islamist groups to take over some territories nearby Jarablus and Manbij and Al-Bab to prevent the Kurdish forces from linking the three cantons and basically declaring those areas as autonomous Kurdish areas. And they're also doing that politically by forging an alliance with the Russian, and the Russian obviously have a lot of leverage on the Kurdish leaders and parties. And
wait a second. Why do the Russians? I thought the Americans were supplying, doing airstrikes in favor of the Kurds.
Both, but Turkey right now is disappointed with the Obama administration because it was expecting more support from the U.S. and it's not getting as much support as it wanted, especially in its battle in Al-Bab. So Erdogan is complaining about how he has been betrayed by the international alliance and that he's not getting any support in his battle in Al-Bab and so on. But he has more leverage with Russia, and Russia has some kind of leverage or influence on the Kurds. And obviously the Kurds are trying to open a number of different make a number of different alliances with the Russian, but also with the Iranian and with the U.S. But Turkey is trying to pressure them through the Russian and also the Syrian regime. And so apparently they got some kind of assurance from the Syrian regime that the Syrian regime is against an independent Syrian Kurdistan and is willing to work to a certain extent with the Turks against the establishment of a Kurdish area in northern Syria.
And the government gave some warning to the Kurds in Aleppo that their period of autonomy is about up?
Right, and that they have a few weeks to leave especially the Kurdish PYD party to leave Aleppo. So, I mean, clearly the Syrian regime is very pragmatic and is willing to shift its alliances according to what serves their interests best. And it seems that having Turkey on their side right now is an important priority, and that's why they're willing to do whatever it takes to curtail the influence of the Kurdish groups in northern Syria.
Well, thanks.
So,
I'm sorry, I cut you.
So the Turks are very pragmatic, and the Russians are very pragmatic. Both are trying to have some kind of settlement in Syria. The Russian want Syria as one entity because they don't want to have an influence over just an archipelago of different forces and so on. So they want to preserve the Syrian territory without fragmentation, and that's why they are willing to make some kind of concessions. And the Turks are want also Syria to preserve its entity to prevent the fragmentation and as such the creation of a Kurdish entity in northern Syria.
Well, thank you for talking, and we're eager to see you in Connecticut on the 7th.
Thank you very much. Thank you.